Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Azure Thursday. For the first time from our brand new studio.
And how awesome is that?
Yeah, it looks really professional. You should see behind the screens, right? And there's a lot of technical stuff right there, and it looks great. Yeah, welcome. And we have some great sessions tonight. So maybe you want to tell something about that?
Yeah, definitely. So tonight, as you all probably already saw on the agenda, we have Sarah Lee doing an awesome session about all her great work at Octopus Deploy. And then we have Kendall Roden later on, giving us an introduction to containerized apps in Azure. So I'm looking forward to both sessions.
Yeah, me too.
Do we still have to introduce some of the house rules, or are we just ready to bring on our first guest?
I think we're ready to bring in Sarah. Yeah.
Okay, so Sarah, look,
hello.
Technology is working for us.
Yeah.
So for us, it's going to be a bit awkward trying to figure out if we should look in the camera or just be more direct talking with you. So if I don't make eye contact, that's just because this whole setup is pretty new so far. Okay. But before I start fully introducing you, Sarah, let me first congratulate you on becoming an Azure MVP.
Yeah.
Because I think most of the audience saw the announcement on Twitter, but it's awesome to have you back in a very active role in the community again.
Yeah, thank you. It was pretty surreal to get that email earlier in the week, so it's still trying to sink in. So thank you to everybody that's wished me well. I think I got back to everybody.
Awesome. So quick introduction. Sarah, I think most of us already know you because you're very active on social media. Previously worked for Microsoft, and as of October last year, you transitioned to Octopus Deploy, and I think you're doing some awesome work there. Jorrit already confessed that Octopus Deploy basically was like your first love.
You could say it like that. Yeah, I've worked with Octopus Deploy for quite a while, and one of my previous employers. Now it's all Azure DevOps, but I'm really interested if we, about your story, if we should move back to Octopus or what the benefits are. So yeah, I'm looking really, particularly looking forward for this one. So
no pressure, Sarah.
No, definitely
no pressure at all. Because I wanted to ask you one more question, which is not technical focused, but I noticed in your own introduction, you mentioned something about curling. And being one of your hobbies. And that got me so interested because that's one of the very fascinating sports that I love to watch, even recently at the Olympics.
It's something I took up 30 years ago. I'm aging myself very much here. But yeah, I've been curling as a hobby for quite a while now. So it was good to see the British or Scottish teams, because they were all Scottish, win the Olympic gold and silver medals recently at the Olympics. So yeah, it's been a good time for the sport.
Yeah, definitely. So that immediately made me even more excited about catching up with you today. Sorry,
I was
going
to say I'm actually anxiously waiting a parcel because I ordered new curling shoes, and I'm hoping they arrive tomorrow in time for a game that I'm playing tomorrow night. So
definitely. Right. So if there's any possibility they're streaming the game, is there like a URL that you want us to promote, or?
They used to, actually, my ice rink had a webcam, like a really poor quality webcam, but they took it down because their broadband just couldn't cope with it and people were complaining. So unfortunately not. But if you ever do get the chance to have a go at curling, I would highly recommend everybody have a go. It's great fun, and it's actually a really great team building exercise. I've taken previous colleagues and teams on a fun night out having a go at curling, and it's always fun. So definitely have a go if you ever get the chance to have a go at it.
Well, I am very fortunate to live up north in the Netherlands, where curling is very actively one of the sports in our region. So I'll definitely have a go at it, especially after this great introduction. So,
Awesome.
So with that, a bit personal information. Thank you for that. I would love to give you the floor.
Yep.
And get blown away by all the cool Octopus Deploy options that are coming our way.
Awesome. So I'll just start sharing my screen. So hopefully
Yes,
you're
please.
all seeing that, or Henk in the background is doing his magic. So tonight I want to talk about Octopus Deploy and Azure. And I've entitled the talk When Superpowers Combine, because I think Azure is a superpower, and I also think that Octopus Deploy is a superpower. So hopefully at the end of this talk, you have the same opinion of me. So as a team, we're saying, my name is Sarah Lean and I am a techie in Scotland. I have been in the IT industry for about 17 odd years now, and I've come from that sector that's the IT pro or the sysadmin or the operations team or infrastructure engineer. So my background is definitely not developer. So trying to almost adapt to some of the things that are happening nowadays is quite interesting, and that's where I often tell my story from. So that's the angle I'm going to be coming at this evening's talk from. As I usually attend meetups, I like to bring a bit of Scotland with me, but unfortunately, as I can't be there with you this evening and can't bring you some of the goodies from Scotland, I wanted to share a fun picture of a Highland cow, and I actually think this is quite relevant to a lot of IT engineers, regardless of your job title, because we have to be very adaptable. We have to learn new technologies, we have to adapt to our customers' needs, we have to adapt to our business demands on us and the IT equipment. And the Highland cow, or the Heelan cow as we call it here in Scotland, is a very adaptable animal. So the Highland cow can live outside all year round because it has this great coat or two coats of fur that help it keep warm and dry during the winter, and keep it cool during the summer as well. And they can adapt to either living on like flat grasslands, or they can live on some of the hills in Scotland. So I think it's quite apt sharing a picture of the Highland cow, because they are a very adaptable animal, and as IT professionals, we are all adaptable as well. Plus, it's a pretty cool picture that I took a few years ago of the stocksman loving his animal and congratulating it for winning some prizes. So that's just a little bit of Scotland being shared with you this evening. Now, before we kind of get started, I do have a bit of an interactive question for you all. So I want to know a bit about whether you know what Octopus Deploy is or not. I've been at Octopus, as Esther was saying, for 6 months now, and I knew a little bit about it because my manager actually is based here in Scotland. Being an Australian company and having two of us, or a few of us, but based in Scotland, is quite interesting. But that's another story for this evening. So what I would love you to do is, if you could head over to Slido and just answer the question that I have on screen, and maybe we'll pick it up later on and it can adapt to what's actually going to be said this evening, and I can try and adapt the presentation depending on if you all know about Octopus or you don't know about Octopus. So yeah, I'd love you to take a quick few seconds and interact with me this evening. Being said that, if you do have questions, please post them wherever you're watching, and I'm sure we'll grab them at the end with the team and we can address them. So definitely ask your questions, because I'd love to have them as well this evening. Now, this evening, we're going to be talking about an imaginary pet shop called Octo Pet Shop, and we love to talk about this here at Octopus Deploy. Now, this pet shop has an online presence. They have a web store, but they're having some issues with it that we're going to try and solve with some of the cool technology that I've mentioned already this evening. So one of the issues that they have is that their online shop is not stable. There's a lot of issues, a lot of outages, and mainly that's because the server is actually a physical server that resides inside the pet shop. So there's occasionally times where it will get unplugged, it will get dusty, someone has to come and clean it out, and it's just getting old. It is a legacy bit of hardware that they want to get rid of in the pet shop and clear up some space under their desk. The other challenge that they have at the moment is that they don't have a test environment. So if they're trying to make changes to that online shop, they're pushing to production, which causes some outages because they have no test environment to test those code changes, first of all. And it also is causing some issues with customers when they push out a new functionality that doesn't quite go right or the customer isn't quite used to. So those are the challenges that we want to solve, and how I'm going to solve those challenges this evening is with a few bits of technology. Now, the first one is to introduce Azure as the platform. We're going to replace that PC, that bit of hardware that lives in their pet shop, and we're going to put all of that infrastructure inside Azure. And that will give us a few benefits that we'll talk about later on. Now, I'm also going to introduce Azure DevOps. And again, this is where we're going to store the source code, and that's going to be that single source of truth for us. It's also going to help us build the application code ready for deployment to our infrastructure that we've got on Azure. And last but no means least, we're going to introduce Octopus Deploy to try and help deploy that build, that software, that code out to our website in a repeatable manner, in a consistent manner as well, and take some of the complexity out deploying to our web apps as well. Now, hopefully a lot of you will know what Azure is. Being Azure Thursday, I'm sure a few of you are familiar, but for anybody that isn't familiar with Azure, I always like to show this slide. It is a bit out of date, but it just shows you the sheer scale of Azure in terms of what it can offer you. And there's lots of services that aren't even included on this slide now. Azure is a massive ecosystem. It's a massive ecosystem of compute, of database, of monitoring, of content delivery, a whole host of things, identity, security, and it can be really flexible in terms of allowing you to grow as a business. And you don't have to be a massive enterprise organization either to take advantage of it. You can be a small startup, you can be a small shop like Octopet Shop and have a small need and be able to host your needs there in a hopefully cost-effective manner if you've architected your design correctly. So that's why we're choosing Azure, because it makes sense from Octopet Shop's point of view to provide us with a new environment to actually host our infrastructure or hardware. It is hopefully going to be cost effective, where we'll be able to spin up services when we need them and pull them down when we don't need them. And it'll hopefully build that reliability as well into it. Now, as I said, the second part of the plan with Octopet Shop is to use Azure DevOps. Now, in a simplistic way, Azure DevOps is a DevOps tool that helps you automate your source code and your deployment of your software or your code as well. When we look at Azure DevOps, it offers you a lot of benefits. Again, I'm sure a few of you will be familiar with it this evening and not need me to tell you the benefits of it. But again, for those that aren't aware of it, it can help you with the collaboration of code development. You can have that single source of truth. We'll be using the Azure repos for Octopet Shop's source code. We'll be holding all of it there, and that will be that single source of truth for any developer, for any infrastructure engineer that comes along and needs to interact with the Octopet Shop website. We'll also be using Azure boards to actually plan out our work. So to log any tasks that may need to be carried out, any improvements for the website. We'll be logging any bugs, any issues, and just having that to-do list where we can all have, again, an interactive view so that we can report back to the customer of Octopet Shop, or they can even actually come here and interact with the Azure DevOps board as well and have a look at what's happening and just discuss the plans going forward. And last but not least, we'll be using the Azure pipelines to actually build and test that source code that we have for the website. And then we'll be handing that off and what it builds off to Octopus Deploy. Because there is great integration with Octopus Deploy and Azure DevOps, the tools work in harmony together. Azure DevOps, Octopus Deploy all work very well together. There's a seamless integration path, and it's not abrasive when we actually try and join these three services together. Now, I asked you earlier on if you knew about Octopus Deploy, and having a look at the results, we've got a mixed bag of whether people have heard about it or not. So hopefully I'll be able to tailor what I'm about to talk about and some of the benefits of Octopus Deploy based on this survey. So thank you to everybody that took the few minutes to fill in that quick survey for us this evening. So what is an Octopus Deploy? Octopus Deploy is a deployment tool. When we think about DevOps, we often split it up into your CI, your continuous improvement, or your continuous delivery, CD pipeline process. We'll be using Azure DevOps for that CI part of the pipeline, and then we'll be using Octopus Deploy for the CD part of that deployment of our actual application, and how we put that onto the website and the infrastructure there as well. Now, we'll be using Azure with Octopus Deploy, but Octopus Deploy is capable of interacting with any of your infrastructure, whether you're using Windows Server, Linux Server, if you're using AWS, GCP, Kubernetes, Helm, ECS, the list goes on where you can deploy to. Octopus Deploy can take anything that you're using, whether that be legacy or whether that be modern infrastructure, whether that be some of the cooler technologies, things like Kubernetes that I don't know much about, and you can use Octopus Deploy to help you actually orchestrate all of that. It's not just your source code, it's not just your applications that you can build with Octopus Deploy. We can also deploy your infrastructure as well, and that'll I'll be talking about that later on and during the demo as well. Now, because Octopus Deploy just focuses on the CD part of your CI/CD pipeline, we have key integration with a lot of those CI servers that you are hopefully familiar with and maybe using already. Jenkins, GitHub Actions, TeamCity, Azure DevOps, the list goes on in terms of what we can integrate with. So there's no need to necessarily ditch the tools that you have. You can marry Octopus Deploy into your existing environment, into your existing tooling to help you maybe make that complex deployment more simple. When I say that Octopus Deploy can help make your deployment process simple, that's because hopefully it will, because you use one process for actually deploying your application out. We don't have separate processes depending on whether you're deploying to test, whether you're deploying to production, QA, whatever that may be. We can use different things like variables and scoping steps inside the process, depending on what environment you're deploying to or what you're actually deploying as well. Hopefully, again, I'll show you some of that inside the demo and get you involved in what that actually means. We also have the traceability, so we'll be able to see the release version numbers. You might find a few releases in my environment while I've been testing this morning, but you can have that traceability of what's happening. You can quickly see if your production environment's on version 1.0.2 versus your test environment, which is maybe on 0.0.2, and you can understand where your environments are and how they differentiate from each other. Although we're focusing on making your deployment simplified, we can also do those advanced deployment patterns that you may have to implement in your environment, whether that be something like rolling deployments or blue-green deployments or canary deployments, or if you're going a bit more complex into the multi-tenancy environments, we can focus all on that for you and help you with that as well. So there's lots of capabilities to dive in here with Octopus Deploy and just make that deployment simplified for yourself. Now, in terms of deploying your infrastructure, we can use something called runbooks inside Octopus Deploy. On the slide, it will say that it allows your teams to automate routine maintenance and incident management tasks, but that's only a small part of what runbooks can do for you. I love runbooks in terms of building out my infrastructure, building out test environments, production environments, ripping them down when I don't need them, and having that automation process there so that I don't have to sit and do next or fill in a GUI in order to answer those forums. But it can also do simple tasks such as going through all of my virtual machines in my environment and applying Windows updates to them, or updating all of the software using Windows Package Manager or Chocolatey. It can carry out some of those automation tasks. Again, if you haven't touched an environment for a while and you need to update it, you can automate all of that with runbooks. The power is there to help you automate your tasks and those mundane tasks with runbooks as well from an operations or infrastructure point of view. Now, the team at Octopus pride themselves in being API first. So often a lot of new features will start with the API, and they'll start from building up there, and they'll start to build the GUI on top of that API. We also have a command line tool. So if you are not familiar with APIs or you don't like interacting with them, sometimes I don't like interacting with APIs, there is a command line tool that can help you and is a lot easier sometimes than trying to figure out how to pull or get or post with an API command. However, saying that, a recent project I actually worked on was using PowerShell scripting and the API for Octopus to actually create this script that I can trigger using my Elgato Stream Deck. So I have an Elgato Stream Deck, which is a piece of kit that sits on my desk that has buttons on it, and I can configure them to do certain tasks. A couple of my buttons actually trigger some runbooks to deploy test environments for me inside Azure. And that just is a big old PowerShell script that calls a lot of the API from Octopus Deploy, so that I don't have to pull up a browser, have to log into it, have to pull up the certain part of it and click those buttons. I can just hit the button on my Stream Deck. So there are some really cool things that you can do, combining things that you enjoy, maybe have on your desk, and using the API as well. So I love the fact that Octopus is stretching me to learn new things and get outside of my comfort zone, even if it is just to make my job a lot easier. Now, as I said, we're going to be focusing on building a CI/CD pipeline for the Octo Pet Shop website and deploying it out. I had some fun using PowerPoint and drawing out that CI/CD pipeline. The design department will probably be cringing because of my artwork, and they'll probably be able to do it much better. But I thought this was pretty cool, being able to draw something and then have it kind of build back out in my slides. So what we're going to be focusing on and what we're going to try and build for Octo Pet Shop is being able to pull down the code and work on it locally on our laptop, on our workstation. We'll then commit the code into our source control repo, which is an Azure DevOps repo. The Azure DevOps pipeline will be monitoring that repo, and then it will start to build out the code depending on the steps that we have put into that pipeline. It will push the artifacts to Octopus, which is ultimately a .zip file in our case. And then Octopus will deploy that out to our test infrastructure and our production infrastructure. And hopefully that will mean that we get, good source control and a good process for having a repeatable process and being able to push code and test it and see what's happening in it as well. Now, I've spoke a lot and showed you a lot of slides. So let's dive into the demo part and hope that everything is working as it should be. So here is my Azure DevOps environment. And again, I'm sure a few of you will be familiar with this environment, but let's just take a look for those that might not be. Down the left-hand side, we have the menu, and we can interact with our space, our area, our project inside Azure DevOps. We have our boards, where if we click on that, we'll see we have a bunch of tasks that we are wanting to work through and are our backlog, or we have issues for the website. We're actually going to address the copyright date issue tonight, hopefully, fingers crossed, if the demo gods and Azure DevOps is not having issues like it has been unfortunately this afternoon. But this is the workboard where we can interact, we can add tasks onto it, we can claim tasks if we want to work on them, or we can just report on what's happening and just keep that all going and in that environment. Inside the repo part, we have all of our code. This is where the source code of the application and also our infrastructure lives. Now, it's a .NET application. It's a .NET Core 6.0. I think we're running this version of app. Now, as I said at the very start, I'm not a developer, so a lot of this goes over my head. I can do simple changes inside the code. Hopefully, we'll be demoing that tonight for you. But this is where all of the code for this website lives, and being able to source code it. And I can pull that down to my local machine and work on it from there. What else we have in terms of the pipeline? We also have the pipeline that takes that code once there's a code change and works through it. If we have a look at a previous release, it will show us the different stages that we have. And I think this is probably easier than having a look at the YAML pipeline. So What we have here is various different steps that help us get this application ready for deployment through Octopus Deploy. So we go through some .NET steps. So we restore, we build, we test the code, we publish the various different parts of the code, and then we package it up for the for pushing to Octopus. And we're packaging this up into .zip files to push over to Octopus. We then collect some metadata from inside Azure DevOps to push into Octopus for us and make sure that we have all of that information in Octopus in case we need that. And then last but not least, we push those packages, so those new zip files, into our Octopus instance and get them ready for deployment. So if we head over to our Octopus environment, we can have a look at what's over in this setup. Now inside here, you'll see that we have the menu system at the top. So let's just enlarge this so you get a full screen. So up the top is your menu system for Octopus Deploy, and you can see there's various different menus that you can interact with. When you're setting up a brand new Octopus space, the first thing you'll have to do is kind of go into the infrastructure and accounts. Now, we have linked our Azure subscriptions to Octopus already. So Octopus has full rights to stop instances, to delete instances, to create, fully interact with our Azure subscription as we need it to. I'm not going to show you how to do that because you'll get some of my credentials, but basically you can add in your Azure subscription, your AWS connection, your DCP, or even your on-prem connection as well to servers. It doesn't have to be a cloud account that you're attaching to this. Once you've got that connection to your environment, to your infrastructure, what you need to set up next is what we call inside Octopus is environments. Now this relates to maybe what you want to call as your life cycle for your process. So we have a test environment for Octopet Shop, and we also have a production environment. You may have more. If you have a QA or a dev or even just something else in that life cycle, you would add all of those in here. But as you can see, we've already created the test environment and we've created our production environment, which is all we need for Octopet Shop because we want to introduce that test environment that they currently don't have, and we want to try and keep costs at a minimum for them because they are just a small pet shop. So once we've done that, we want to start to think about deploying our infrastructure out to the environment so that we can start to package up the code and push that out to that. So what I do is I use runbooks, as I said before. I like the runbooks for automating the deployment of multiple different environments. I have a runbook here called Bicep Create Infrastructure, which, as from the name, you can see actually helps me create my infrastructure using Azure Bicep templates. Now, I built this process up and it's 5 stages long. The first stage is just to create the Azure resource group. So if we have a quick look inside this, we can see we've configured various different things to happen, but ultimately all that's running is an Azure CLI command to create that resource group. We're pulling in some parameters, some variables that we've configured for the location and the resource group name, and that runbook will kick off that step and create our Azure resource group. The next step actually takes some PowerShell and deploys out my Azure Bicep templates. Now, if we have a quick look at the code, it's taking our Azure Bicep files that we have stored and it's then deploying them out. Now, if you've ever used Azure Bicep, you'll be a bit familiar with this. And I know there was a great session from Azure Thursday, I can't remember when it was, about Bicep templates from Esther and Freak. So definitely check that out if you haven't, because that has really helped me with my Azure Bicep template learning as well. Basically, this step takes our Azure Bicep templates, which are a nested template collection, and deploys out our infrastructure for us. I've already ran it for the test environment, so that's already done. What we're going to kick off tonight, so you can see it, is the production one. Now, after our infrastructure has been deployed using the Azure Bicep templates, we have 3 steps here that register those new bits of infrastructure that we've actually deployed out. What this actually does is tell Octopus that there's new deployment targets, there's new infrastructure that we can use to actually deploy out to it. So we have this web app, or 3 web apps in this case, that we can deploy out our code to, and we'll see that when we start to build out the deployment instance. If we click Run, we can select the environment that we want to do this to. So I've already done test earlier on today, so I want to do production. So if we click Run, that will go off and it will start to deploy all of that for us. If we have a quick look back inside infrastructure and then click inside the test environment, we have those test web apps already registered for us. So we can see they're already deployed and they're already connected to Octopus Deploy, ready for us deploying our source code out to them. And if we quickly have a check inside Azure, we can see inside the resource group here, those bits are there for us. So we've got the 3 web apps, and we have the Azure SQL server as well, and the app service plan all ready for us. So if we have a look at our code now, we have the code stored on our repository on our machine locally, and I want to walk you through some of the different bits that we have here. So we have this front web end page which has the copyright date as 2018, and we want to change that. So let's make that small change. So if we change that to 2022 and update that properly, and we save that. Let me double check I have the right code pulled down locally. So we have the right code. So I've made that change. So I've got 2022 here, and what I want to do is sync that change up into my Azure repo so that it can kick off a pipeline for us. So we'll do changed date on front web app. Now, I'm also going to reference the issue that was logged, and that's issue number 16, because that will help us link those issues, and it will show us within the commit message and in that actual issue within DevOps that we've actually made a change and we've done something to that. So if we click save to that and sync our changes, those will go up into our Azure DevOps repo, and it should kick off the pipeline, all being well. I did have a small issue this afternoon because Azure DevOps had an outage, so fingers crossed it's working for us. Let's go back in and have a quick look just to see if it has kicked off. Yep, it has kicked off. So we can leave that running in the background, and what we want to do is actually build the pipeline that will deploy the code once it's pushed into Octopus by Octopus. So if we go into our Octo Pet Shop job, we can see that create infrastructure for our production environment is still running away in the background. But what we are going to have a look at here is deployments. This is the part inside Octopus where you'll actually define the process for deploying your code base out to your actual environment or infrastructure, in our case, our web apps. So if we click on define the deployment process and click add step, we're confronted by what we call step templates inside Octopus. These are either created by people inside Octopus, so we have curated a lot of these steps, or by community members, and you can contribute to these too if you see something that isn't there. These just help you make it easier when you actually want to do something. If you're trying to, deploy a resource to Azure, or in our case, we'll be deploying some packages out to an Azure web app, they give us something that we can work through. We don't have to know necessarily how all of that works. We can just walk through the step template. So if we have a look at this, so we have to create 4 different things. So we have to deploy a package to configure a database, and then we have to deploy the various code to our web apps. So the first stage we want to do is package. So let's search for package. Now you could search, or you can look through the different menu systems to get this. We're going to deploy a package to configure our database. So if we say database, And hopefully I can type live for everybody watching. The first step that we want to configure, or the first stage that we want to configure here, is configuring targets in the role. So we want to deploy this step out to our database server. However, we don't recommend that you connect your database server to Octopus directly. We always say use a jump box or a bastion box to connect between Octopus and your database, just from a security point of view. That's what we recommend that you do. So we're going to click Bastion because we have that jump box or that Bastion box set up already, which is ultimately just a Windows server sitting inside our Azure environment as well. And it will connect to our SQL Server and deploy out the configuration that needs to happen to it. For the package, we are going to pick the database one. So there's various different parts to this application that's been made. Part of it is for the configuration of the database. Now, there's no other stage or step that we need to configure in this, so we'll click Save to save that, and we'll click Add a Step. Now, we want to deploy out to an Azure Web App, so we want to deploy an Azure Web App stage here. So let's start this off. Now we have the option here to actually use what's called a worker or a worker pool. If you've ever used Azure DevOps before, you'll be familiar with this term being called an agent. So the agent that kicks off your jobs inside Azure DevOps is what we call a worker or a worker pool. If you've used GitHub Actions, you'll know that as a runner. So those runners carry out your jobs or your tasks for you. Again, we call it worker here inside Octopus. Now we have some hosted, so the hosted Windows and the hosted Ubuntu ones are ones that we spin up inside our cloud infrastructure, and they are spun up when you need them on demand and then shut down when they're idle. Or you could have your own. So I have my own pool of Windows servers sitting in the background with all of the necessary bicep tooling, Azure CLI, Azure PowerShell, you name it, the tools installed on this server so that I can carry out these steps. So I'm going to click on the Windows worker pool, and it will help me carry out this stage. Now we're doing the product service part of the code, so we want to deploy this out to our deployment target that's for that product service. Now again, we can leave pretty much all of these steps configured. We don't need to touch them, but you could, if you were using deployment slots in your web app, you would obviously input some details here, but we don't need to because we're not using that here. However, we do want to add in some additional features. Inside our .NET application, there's a file called appservices.json that you can use to actually configure different parts of your application. So using variables outside of your application, this app settings file can pull them into them. Again, I'm not a developer. This has been explained to me and showed me that this is how you need to do a .NET and how you need to change some of the variable replacements inside your application. Again, if you're not doing .NET development, you probably don't need to do this, but it's just something that I've learned. And I've also learned that if you spell this wrong, then your whole deployment can fail because it can't find the file if you spelt it incorrectly, as you would assume. So let's check. I'm putting in the appsettings.json, and hopefully I have spelled that correctly. So I'll click Save. Now that's 2 of my steps inside this deployment process created. If I click Add, we want to do another one. So another web app to be configured. So again, let's give it a name to product. No, sorry, we're doing the shopping cart. Now this step is almost identical to what the one we did before. So we'll pick the worker location again as Windows. This time when we're deploying out, we're going to pick the shopping cart. And we'll also pick the package for the shopping cart service. And again, we need to add in these additional steps to help us do some transformations inside our app using variables. I'll make sure I spell it correctly. If we scroll down, we have some condition settings that we can have per stage. Now, I want to run this job in parallel with the previous step. So I'm happy for this job or this step to actually happen at the same time as the previous one. Now, this can cause some issues depending on how your app is and depending on the load on your system to actually carry this out. So I know that this is fine to run, but you would probably have to do some testing in your environment in order to understand if you can run the 2 steps or multiple steps at the same time. Now we have one more step to add in, and that's for our front end. So let's get that configured. So again, it's identical to the previous ones. We're going to pick the Windows worker pool. This time we're going to pick the web deployment because we're deploying to the front end. Again, pick the web code and we will add in these additional settings. And app settings.json. And again, I'm quite happy with this step to run at the same time as the previous one because I know it doesn't cause any issues with the deployment. Now that's our deployment pretty much done. However, there are other options that we have available to us. So for example, if you were looking to notify your team inside Slack, you could actually post out some kind of message into a Slack channel or a team inside there. Equally, we could do it with Teams. So again, if you're using Microsoft Teams, you can post that into a channel there and notify people about it. Or you could use email. There's various different communications methods that you can add into this step so that if people aren't using Octopus or you have a lot of automation throughout all of this process and you want to notify the team what's happening, whether that be a success, whether it be a failure, then you can also do that. We're looking at in the future integrating with ServiceNow so that you can integrate these notifications inside service tickets for your service desk to action and pass on to the relevant team and have that notification for you. So there's various different things that you can do. We've kept it very simple with this demo just to kind of show you the art of the possible. However, there is one step that I do want to show you, and that's the manual intervention step. What this step will do for us is actually stop the process at some point where we configure it so that we can have that human element added into this automation process. There are times where you probably want a human to double check that you're deploying your code or you're kicking off a deployment to your infrastructure. That might just be that extra check. Again, rolling out to production is always scary and you should have checks in place before you do it. This manual intervention step will stop the process and force someone, a human being, to go and click a button and say that it's okay to actually do that deployment. I want this for my production environment. I'm happy for people to push out to test whenever they want, but I want to have that manual intervention so that there's a double check or a sanity check that goes in place before it goes out to production. Now, you can put in instructions around what that person has to check. Maybe they have to go and check that a change request has been put in, that certain tests have passed okay, whatever it may be. I'm going to put in, let's say, are you okay for this to... simple test, a simple question for that person. Now you can configure this to set to one person, to a team of people to actually push the manual override button and allow the deployment to go through. Because I'm on my own and I've got no one else to tech with tonight, I'm just going to configure this as everyone. So everyone inside my organisation can push this deployment out. But that's probably not best practice in real life, so don't follow my example. Use me as a very bad example. Now, the conditions allow us to configure what happens and when this will happen. I only want this to happen inside my production process, so I click on Run Only for Specific Environments and click Production. So it'll only run in production. It won't happen when test is kicked off. Again, we just want the production environment just that wee bit more safe in terms of pushing out to it. Now you'll probably see here, we have the manual intervention step at the very bottom of the process, which is not the ideal place for it. So we want to move that up by clicking on the ellipsis and reordering the steps. If we drag this up to the top and click Done and click Save, we now have everything ready for our deployment out to our infrastructure. So what we want to do is click on Releases and create a release. Now we could actually have this configured so that our Azure DevOps pipeline actually configures this release for us. So the Azure DevOps pipeline can build all the software, can push the packages, create a release, and actually then deploy it out to our test environment. We could have that all automated for us if we wanted. I'm keeping it a bit manual so that I can walk you through some of the processes this evening. I would click Save here to kickstart this release, and then I would pick Deploy to test. Now I have the option here to trigger it when it wants to happen. So you can either pick it to happen now, or you can happen later. So you could have it going out at 3 AM in the morning on a Saturday morning if you were feeling brave and you were happy for that to happen. I'm going to set now so that we can have a look at this actually kicking off. Now you'll see it will start to look at the packages, so it'll start to grab a copy of the packages that we've pushed over from Azure DevOps and then start to deploy that out to it. We can click on Task Log and have a look at what's happening in the background. Now we have various different levels what we can configure it to. So we can have just the info level, or we can have it going verbose and giving us a lot of information here around what it's doing. We can see here it's connected to our database, and it's used a username and password that we can't see because it's a sensible variable, and it's deployed it out, and going by the green kind of colouring, it's successfully done that stage. So we'll let that kick off because it takes a few minutes, and what we'll do is have a look at, let me see, my screen's being a bit weird here. If we have a look inside the configuration menu, we can see various different things that we can configure or have a look at. We could configure that SMTP server if we were sending out emails during our deployment process. You would have to configure that. We have RBAC configuration, so we have rules here where we can give people different access using either their user permissions or some built-in team permissions that we have, or you can create your own. What's pretty cool is the audit log, though. There's a lot of information collected in the background every time we interact with Octopus, whether that just be logging in and having a look, or if we're kicking off a deployment. As you can see here, I kicked off that deployment and it's logged that information for me. It's also logged various different things that have been happening in the background as well. It's pretty cool to be able to pull out of this information, whether you're in an audit situation or you're trying to troubleshoot why something has happened and maybe who did it. Not necessarily to point the finger, but to just see what's happening inside your environment and have a look at it. If you were to delete things, say you deleted this whole project, that whole Octopus or Octopet Shop project inside this environment, you would still have a log of it. You're not deleting those audit logs with it. So even if you delete everything that you've done, everything that we did tonight, the audit log would still have a registration of all of that for you. So there's a good audit trail in terms of having a look and making sure everything is happening and when it happens. Now let's have a look and see if this deployment has kicked off. So yes, it has. So a big green tick shows us that this release has actually happened and been successful to our environment. So let's see if we can find the front end of it and have a look at it. Now, this is an Azure web app, so it's actually really responsive. Usually they're quite slow. If we zoom in, we can see that we've changed the name. So the date is no longer saying 2018, it's now saying 2022. It's showing us that we have the version 0.0.1, which was our release number. So if you were eagle-eyed and saw that release number, you'll see that it was running, the release was version 0.0.1, and we're showing that inside the website. And it's also running inside our test environment. So we have a kind of indication there. And those are pulling in variables from Octopus as well, and showing you that transforming inside of your application due to that app settings.json file, and again the configuration of the app. Now what we can do now that we are happy for it to be running inside test is click deploy to production, and we can kick that off as well. So that'll now kick off, and the manual intervention step has automatically kicked in, because we said we only wanted manual intervention for production environments. Now, I probably wouldn't be in a production environment being the person to push the code and push it out to production. I would probably have a colleague check it. However, as I said, I'm on my own tonight, so let's click assign to me and see what happens. It shows me that instruction, so that question that I typed in during the deployment process, it's saying, are you okay to happen? Now, you don't have to type anything in, but for good practice, then yes, you want to probably put in some kind of answer or notes around why you're saying yes to this, or even why you're saying no to this deployment. I'll click on proceed, and what will happen is after a few seconds, the job will kick off and it'll start to push out to production for us. And there you go, it's kicked off and it's starting to do that for us. Now, let me check and see if we have a look at release. I don't think the release notes have actually pushed through. So that's a bit disappointing. My demo has been sometimes working and sometimes not, but it should have had release notes there about my commit message, and it should have shown me the issues that I was solving inside Azure DevOps. But it has been playing up today, so unfortunately that hasn't worked. I'm guessing I've done too well with the demo that if only one thing breaks, then it has to be that thing. Hopefully that's shown you a bit around the process and explained some of those concepts and diagrams that I showed you. Let's just go back to my slides and summarise what we've went through. So we introduced new infrastructure hosted in Azure using Azure Azure Bicep templates to deploy that. We introduced a test environment for the Octo Pet Shop team. We also introduced source control by storing all of our source code inside Azure DevOps repo. We introduced a CI/CD pipeline using Azure DevOps and Octopus Deploy. And hopefully we've introduced a really stable and repeatable and cost-effective solution for Octo Pet Shop all in for them as well, and solved all of those issues that they identified to us at the start of this evening. Now, if there's any kind of call to action that I want to give you all this evening is please do sign up for a trial for Octopus Deploy. As I said, I've been here for 6 months and I have truly enjoyed loving trying the product out, getting to know it, getting to configure it, seeing lots of successes with my deployments. I've also learned tons by breaking it and having to start from scratch again and seeing all those failures. But I guess hands-on learning is a great thing to do, and I learn best through that. So definitely sign up for a trial, have a look. If you've got any questions, if you've got any concerns, please do reach out to me. But again, if I've leaving you with anything this evening, please do have a go with Octopus Deploy and see how easy it is to try and do that deployment process. And last but not least, my contact details are on screen. Please do reach out to me. I've put together some resources and also a copy of my slide deck if you wanted that this evening, and you can get that link on screen as well. So yeah, hopefully this has all been useful to you and I haven't just rambled on, but if we've got any questions, yeah, now is the time. Hopefully the team back in the studio can tell me if there is any questions or not.
Yes, actually we do, and thank you for your session, Sarah. Welcome back to the studio. Yeah, it was a great session, and actually we have some questions for you, so I hope you can answer them. So the first question was from the YouTube from Xing Wu, and he's asking if it's possible to script your deployment process in Octopus Deploy and then reuse that same deployment process in another project by adjusting the parameters.
Yes, so there's a couple of ways you can do that. We have what's called import-export, so you can package that process up and then import it into different projects or different instances of Octopus. I do that quite a bit, so as I take my demos a few times with me and copy them. Alternatively, we do have a new preview feature called config as code, where your deployment will actually be written out to code and stored in, say, GitHub or Azure DevOps repo or some kind of Git repo like that, and it'll be stored inside that. So you could take that code and then put that into another repo, attach it to an Octopus space and take that with you. So there's multiple ways of doing it depending on what you're using, but I love that import-export feature. It's super easy to copy and paste ultimately things from one space to another space inside Octopus.
Great. Well, I think that answers his question, right? So,
Perfect.
you have another question?
Yes. So I got very excited about the whole GUI interface that you offer because I think personally that it will definitely help operators or at least the admins that are have a more ops background to ease up into the whole development workflows. But one of the things that I'm noticing right now is that we also want to onboard customers and give them the option to, for instance, start like part of a pipeline. And I know within Azure DevOps, we can give them very granular access to that one pipeline. And I was wondering if we can do the same or build like a form in front of it, because you already explained it's also API driven. If that allows us to have other teams benefit from the pipelines that we're building.
You should be able to either, like you said, with RBAC controls, with the role-based access, limit people down to whether it be read access. Everybody this evening can actually see what I did and has read access to that, so you can go and check my workings and copy it. But you should be able to do that. You should be able to do it either through the role-based or, like you said, if you are very good at interacting with APIs, you probably could put some kind of form in front of it and then make some changes. Again, because we're also doing the config as code, you probably could, like you say, put a form in front of it. Someone who's maybe not familiar with writing YAML or any of that kind of good stuff, they can answer a form and then you can have it configured. So there's probably a lot of things you can do if you know how, in terms of making it friendly for those that are not IT literate or aren't great with YAML or things like that, like myself.
Or the persons that don't have the Stream Deck at home.
Yes.
Because you basically got me sold when you told me that it's Stream Deck supportable. So yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think I have one final question for you, and that is whether you can mix and match your environment. Like, can you deploy partially to IaaS, partially to PaaS from one in the same pipeline, from one connection?
Yes.
And how does that work with the tentacles?
Yes, you could, absolutely. I used all PaaS services for that deployment this evening, but you could have some PaaS services and then a Windows server with IIS sitting in the background. The connection from Octopus to, say, Azure or AWS uses the credentials that you've given, so it uses that kind of identity methodology. I'm sure there's more fancy words to say that, but basically those connections interact with your PaaS services. If you're using services like a Windows server or a Linux server, you have to install the Octopus tentacle on that. That's just a small application you can either install using Chocolatey or Windows Package Manager, or you could download the MSI and do it manually. But then that tentacle application would then do the connection back to Octopus. But there's nothing to say that you couldn't be deploying out to a piece of PaaS infrastructure and then deploying out to a legacy server, a Windows server, whatever it may be. There's nothing to stop you there. I just did the demo on PaaS because it was easier and quicker to demo for you this evening.
Yeah. So you can mix those kind of environments into one in the same pipe. I know that the tentacle is still one of those official extensions, right, on the Azure VMs. I think you can install it right from the extension pane.
I think so. Yes, I think so. Yes.
All right. Well,
I think you won him back, Sarah.
Good.
I will sign up for the trial again and tingle around a little bit. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so thank you very much for being here this evening, for celebrating your new MVP status with us. And, well, I guess it's time. Let me double check. Well, it's time for a very short bio break for those of you who might need it. Some of you know that I usually am the one that needs it. But we'll be back in 2 minutes and then introduce you to Kendall.
Yep.
Thank you, Sarah, very much, Sarah.
Yes.
the synthetics, and cocaine is non-addictive. What do you mean by non-addictive? By non-addictive, it is meant that the user of marijuana, when deprived of the drug, will not experience the agonies of withdrawal. It is habituated, but its use can be discontinued. Then what is its danger? What is its danger? What is its danger?
Hello, welcome back. Hi, Kendall. Can you hear us?
Hi, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
loud and
perfect.
clear. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here. I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you. And yeah, from our new studio. So it's the first time in the studio. So yeah,
It's awesome.
yeah, it looks great. We're really proud of the whole team that created this studio. So big ups for
Right.
them. Yeah. So well, welcome. And yeah, we're happy to have you for your session. And of course, we also did a little background check on you. Investigated your bio a little bit and tried to find well, the interesting stuff. And well, one of the things I noticed was that you did, you graduated, you did a study, management information systems,
Yes.
but also Italian, right?
Sì.
Yeah.
Un po' italiano, ma non ma. It was many years ago, so
that-
I can't do
was
a
pretty
lot,
good.
but yeah.
Yeah, that's more than I can pronounce. So kudos to you, Kendall.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Multi-anni. That's how you say many years ago. I was actually pretty good at the time when I was living there, and I had a host mother who was about like 83 years old, and she spoke no English. So basically, anytime we needed to communicate, we had to go to the Italian dictionary and figure out how to say what we needed to say. So it was a good time.
awesome. So that's the reason. Yeah, and I also noticed that you are part of a podcast show, right? A co-host of a podcast show. And that's been running for a long.
Podcast.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say yes, the Azure podcast. So I've been doing that for I want to say almost 3.5, if not longer, 3.5 years.
Yeah, I noticed like over 400 shows already. So yeah, that's crazy.
We still have a couple of hours to do tonight
Yes,
to catch up on that one.
for sure.
Yeah, that's it's definitely one that if you wanted to listen to the whole thing, you'd have to really commit. You'd have to commit. And Azure has changed quite a lot since Sajid and the rest of the team kicked off the podcast. So I'm honored that they allowed me to join aboard and share some insights on that.
Okay, and then I still had one personal question before we let you kick off with the presentation. Because I noticed that you also have a part-time job as a cycling instructor. And this is the moment where I probably have to admit to the audience that I started picking up actually exercising on my spinning bike at home with the whole COVID. And as you can see, I probably can still use a couple of pointers to really kick off the workout. But how are you combining like the technical stuff and then also finding time to be a cycling instructor?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's certainly been an adjustment. One thing that I find is when we're so engrossed in technology all day, it's really important to have those moments where you can just go move your body, be physically active, do something that gets you offline. So it's been a really nice haven from that perspective. But I also find that I love motivating and encouraging people and having them challenge themselves to accomplish something that they didn't think they could accomplish. And so if you come take a cycle class, you'll be yelled at by me a lot of words of encouragement, a lot of, you can do it, don't give up on yourself. You can do more than you think is possible. And I think I try to bring that mindset into my job as well. So there is a little bit of overlap there, but it's always a good energy release at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm noticing with all the cycling that I'm doing in the morning now, that it's a great way to kickstart the day and just fully energized, be more focused on the task ahead. So, yeah, I fully
Absolutely.
understand the motivation part. So thanks for explaining that one.
Yeah, and I will say it's challenging sometimes because at the end of a long work day, you might be drained, right? I have days where I'm on video 6 hours and I've had meetings back to back, and then I have to go motivate other people who may be lacking some motivation when I'm in the same position myself. So that can be challenging at times, but I think just being human and letting people know authentically, like, hey, we've had a long day, but we're in this together is always really good.
Yeah, I think that also makes it more a team effort. So I think that's a good thing as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can see this, but my cat is asleep. If you look at the bottom of the camera, you might see him. He's passed out. So I hope that y'all find my my talk today a little bit more entertaining than he does, because he's heard it a lot more.
Oh, I've been there where I tried to practice talks and just had my girlfriend and a cat on the couch. And I still feel very blessed that my girlfriend decided to stay on the couch, because halfway that cat just got up and moved out. And I saw the look on her face going like, oh, I wish I could follow you. Please take me with you. So yeah, that definitely motivated me to keep the talks interesting. So I'm pretty sure we'll be fine tonight, Kendall.
Okay, sounds good.
For sure, yeah. So I guess it's time for the session then.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. And okay, so everyone can see my screen. Great. I'm going to kick it off. Please feel free, to interrupt me on your end if there's any issues, or if you can't hear me, just let me know. But I'm going to jump right in if that's okay with everyone. So
yeah, perfect.
Thanks again for the opportunity. I'm super passionate about the work that we're doing for Azure Container Apps, and I'm really grateful anytime I have the opportunity to share that passion with others. I hope that you're as compelled by the work that we're trying to do as I have been joining the team. And just for a little insight into my background, so I've been at Microsoft for almost 6 years in July, which to me is absolutely wild to reflect back on. And as part of my journey, I've always been customer facing. I've always been in the field, whether it's doing consulting, contracting out to basically help other companies write applications. And then I migrated into what's called the Cloud Native Global Black Belt team at Microsoft, focused specifically on cloud native technology. So for a lot of us, cloud native, what even is that? It's such a buzzword these days. But I think, figuring out what that means to customers and helping enable their journey as they migrate to the cloud and to just architect their applications in a way where they can really take advantage of the benefits of what cloud provides from an integration perspective, from an extensibility and performance perspective. And one of the big movements has been toward Kubernetes. And I think we can all get a quick laugh in when we hear the word Kubernetes because it's just tossed around so much and we all have different thoughts and opinions on it. And maybe some of us are in earlier stages than others in terms of the Kubernetes journey. And as you get deeper into that journey, you'll realize that there is a lot of overhead and operational complexity when it comes to managing Kubernetes at scale. And so that's a lot of what my team or the cloud native black belt team really focused on was how do we help alleviate some of those architectural decisions and complexities by providing best practice guidance and solutions for customers. And so I'm bringing all of that knowledge into the program management role or product management role that I now serve on the Container Apps team. So I joined the team at the end of November, early December, and have been trying to marry all of that customer feedback and all of that customer experience in a brand new way, which is how do we take some of these learnings and really drive a great product experience for customers. So that at least provides a little bit about my motivation, why I love this role, and why I'm so excited about this product and helping enhance customer experiences. So what is Azure Container Apps? If this is a new concept for you, or if you haven't heard of the service, this actually went preview at Microsoft Ignite at the end of 2021. So it's been in preview now for several months. And if you've played around on the Azure platform, which I assume most of you have, in that you're joining the Azure Thursday, live stream here, one of the things that Azure has done really, really well is providing great platform as a service hosting options for your applications. So Azure App Service is such a great platform, has such tight integration with other services on the Azure platform, and to me really enables customers to take things one step deeper. It's not just about migration, but truly how do you modernize your applications and how do you offload some of the responsibilities that make running applications challenging for developers and allow the platform to handle some of those concerns. And so we've played really well in this platform as a service space. We have great functions as a service through Azure Functions and other serverless type of hosting options. Even Cosmos DB, for example, provides a serverless or consumption-based hosting capability. And then obviously we have our managed Kubernetes services. So we have Azure Red Hat OpenShift, we have Azure Kubernetes Service, both of which are really great platforms for helping reduce some of that operational complexity that Kubernetes provides. So where does Azure Container Apps fit in, right? We already have all of these great offerings. Where we really felt like we had an opportunity to cater to a wider range of customers is providing that PaaS-like experience on top of Kubernetes so that customers can run microservice-based applications in containers without having to necessarily think about all of the operational overhead that they might need to plan for if they needed something like an Azure Kubernetes service. And frankly, there are going to be specific scenarios that I think are really good use cases to fall on the spectrum of our offerings. But where I think Azure Container Apps really is aiming to provide is bridging that gap between app service and AKS and providing a more PaaS-based microservice hosting option on top of Kubernetes. So we're built on top of open source, obviously, because we are powered by the Kubernetes platform underlying from an infrastructure perspective. But the nice thing is customers don't have to worry about some of the things they would, like upgrading the infrastructure or doing Kubernetes API updates. We really manage that on the customer's behalf. And our goal is to eventually come to a place where if a customer needed to get app portability and they wanted to port into an open source instance of Kubernetes or even AKS, they would have a really good opportunity to take their container apps workload and find a way to get a more streamlined migration path. And so that's something that we're really working to get feedback around, and we're investing in tooling and ways that we can enhance that experience. So I want to talk a little bit more about the underlying open source integrations and some of the capabilities that those open source integrations provide. So one of them is being able to get flexible scale with these kind of serverless or consumption-based containers. So when you think about Kubernetes platforms, traditionally you're going to provide a certain number of nodes within a Kubernetes cluster. You're going to scale those nodes. You're going to scale pods on top of those nodes in order to extend that workload and scale based on whatever particular metrics might be most relevant to you. So what we've done inside of Azure Container Apps is that we actually provide not only the ability to scale your containers based on HTTP, but also any event-driven autoscaler that's supported by Kata. And Kata is the Kubernetes event-driven autoscaler. So it's an open source project. It's something that can be leveraged today on AKS. So if you wanted to deploy it via Helm chart, or even they're working on a Kata extension, there's some great tooling out there that's already very much adopted in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And essentially it works alongside of the horizontal pod autoscaler in the Kubernetes cluster and extends that capability so that you can get a more event-driven scale. And this is really neat because we built this directly into our platform. So customers don't have to worry about the management of Kata, the versioning of Kata, the deployment of Kata, anything like that. And really, they don't even have to know much about the fact that it is Kata, other than we're in line with documentation and implementation schemas that Kata provides to you. So what Kata enables within our container apps environment is that we can actually give you a native scale to zero capability. So if your application workload falls below a certain threshold from a traffic and CPU consumption perspective, we can then scale your application workload down to zero and essentially charge you nothing. So unlike Kubernetes, where you're really thinking more about the charge for the base compute, right? Whatever node you might be using, or like the compute SKU. Instead, when you think about our model, which is more serverless, you're really just being paid based on that consumption model that's more similar to Azure Functions. And what's neat here as well is that we actually provide the ability for you to run containers in what's called an idle mode. So most serverless platforms typically have a cold start, and we mitigate that by allowing customers to run a certain number of minimum replicas, similar to how you can do that inside of a Kubernetes cluster, but we manage it on your behalf. So let's say, hey, I want to have 5 instances of my application running, at all times. Instead of scaling you down to zero and paying no cost, you'll scale down to the minimum number of replicas. And then once that traffic and CPU threshold that we've documented is hit, we charge you only an idle fee, which is a smaller rate than we would pay for an active container app that's currently taking traffic and scaling based on CPU. So that's one of the things that we provide. And once again, we are in line with Kata open source. However, we are still working to document any potential edge cases or capabilities that we don't currently support. So definitely stay tuned for, hey, I tried this Kata scaler. It didn't operate as expected. We would love that feedback, and we want to make sure that those edge cases are documented well for all of you as we move toward a GA date. Another aspect is really focused on, okay, now that we've abstracted the infrastructure away and we're providing this serverless capability, how else can we enable developers to truly leverage this platform to build microservice-based applications? So we've integrated another open source project into our platform, and that is called Dapper, or the Distributed Application Runtime. So by having Dapper enabled, customers can essentially offload a lot of the typical microservice-based plumbing code that they would bring into their microservices to an application sidecar for Dapper. And so instead of, for example, I'll give you a quick example here. Let's say that you're using Azure Service Bus because in distributed applications, you want to decouple communication as much as possible. So I might have microservice A communicating to microservice B, and I want that to happen in a resilient way so that if microservice B was to go down and another instance was to spin up, it could obviously go to that topic and retrieve that message, like some kind of dead letter queuing, like all of these capabilities, right, that you might not get if you just do direct service to service invocation. So let's say that you have Azure Service Bus sitting between your microservices, and instead of bringing the Azure Service Bus SDK and plumbing all of those applications to publish and subscribe to Azure Service Bus, instead, you can basically define some configuration and apply that within container apps. And what that will do is say, hey, instead of calling through the Service Bus SDK from the application code, I'm going to have my application code call the Dapper sidecar through an HTTP or gRPC endpoint. It's going to say, hey, I want to publish a message to a Azure Service Bus topic or queue. And then the Dapper sidecar will actually handle all of that connectivity and the publishing of the message. So it super simplifies a lot of those microservice-based requirements that typically app developers have to be really knowledgeable about and start bringing into the application code, which sometimes takes away from the core business logic. So that's what Dapper does in a nutshell. So we do provide that capability so you can easily inject a Dapper sidecar into your application and take advantage of some of the capabilities Dapper provides, which I'm happy to talk about more, and hopefully we'll have the chance to demonstrate a little bit today as we progress in the presentation. And then another thing to call out here is that we're continuing to enhance and work on what our code to cloud story is going to look like for Azure Container Apps. So obviously one of those is going to be GitHub Action integration. So being able to easily create new container apps in an automated fashion and integrate into CI/CD processes that you might already have within your organization. And then we're also working on ways that we can create local tooling experiences through Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code that will help you to get a better development experience and connective, interactive experience with the container apps instance that's running in Azure. And then the last point that I really want to touch on here is, in addition to these open source projects that we've provided, we're also incorporating Envoy and managed ingress into our platform. So what's really nice about this is through the managed ingress capability, customers no longer have to wonder how they can expose an endpoint publicly to external consumers. Instead, they can basically just define, hey, I want ingress to be enabled for a particular container app. I want that ingress to be either within the container apps environment where only other container apps can communicate with this, or I can expose it publicly, to the internet, and we'll actually generate the default domain. We'll assign an FQDN to that particular application and make that consumable via Envoy. So through this capability, we're also enabling the concept of what's called revisions, and what this allows you to do is essentially make intentional changes to your container app that's deployed. And think of a container app as a single microservice within your overall application architecture. And so if I make a couple of changes to a particular container app, I can trigger the creation of a new revision, and I can get traffic splitting capability enabled through Envoy, where I actually enable some A/B testing scenarios or blue-green deployment scenarios. So we're continuing to flush out exactly what revisions will look like and how we will be able to help customers use this feature for as many relevant scenarios as possible. So stay tuned on this as well. So last but not least, before I dive in a little bit deeper, and maybe I'll pause for questions just to make sure that I don't miss anything. What can you build with Azure Container Apps? So when you look at our main goal for the service, microservices is certainly a first-class citizen within Azure Container Apps, and we're really trying to optimize our platform to allow you to deploy your microservice-based applications and get great communication, especially using some of the neat capabilities within Dapper, should you so choose, right? That's not a requirement by any means. We have the event-driven processing, which is really enabled through Kata and the ability to monitor these different event sources and then trigger application work to take place based on that scale. We have web applications. So if you wanted to run your web apps inside of container apps alongside of your microservices, we're providing capability like custom domains, managed certificates, bring your own certificates, and integrated authentication. So these are things that are currently in the works and that we've committed to on our public backlog. So bring your own certs and custom domains. So hopefully we should see that feature released fairly soon. We also have obviously public API endpoints or just internal API endpoints that you would potentially use the concept of revisions with and do traffic splitting. And then we're also really looking into background processing. So making sure that if you have long running background processes that we don't enforce timeouts, but those can continue to run and you can be successful running those workloads inside of container apps. So before I continue and talk a little bit more about what you can expect from an environment and container apps perspective and what it looks like and get into a demo, I'd love to pause here for any questions. So I'll stop talking now. Does it look like we have any questions from the live stream? I might not have a perfect view of that, so feel free to surface those up if there are any. me see here. Can everyone hear me okay? No questions. Okay, cool. I see now. No questions at the moment. Sounds good. Then we'll keep going. Okay, let's progress. So let's talk a little bit more about the actual container environment and what this looks like if you were to go do a deployment. So we have a concept within container apps of a container app environment. So you can think of this as the grouping of multiple container apps that are related. So you would deploy multiple related services within a single environment. If you want to deploy applications to the same virtual network, that's another great reason to deploy them within the same environment. And then if you're using things like Dapper, if you want applications to be able to communicate using Dapper service-to-service invocation, or if you want them to share a Dapper configuration, that's another great reason to deploy to a single environment. And another thing that we provide is we do logging within your environment. We obviously stream, logs to log analytics within Azure. And we're also working on some capabilities for log streaming directly from the container app itself, where you can, immediately see those logs instead of, a small delay when exporting to log analytics. So if you want those logs to be aggregated and visible in a single place, you can share an environment. Some of the reasons why you would not want to deploy to the same environment is if you never want two applications to share the same compute resources, or if you want to ensure that applications cannot communicate with each other through Dapper, then that would be a good reason to potentially create a second environment there. So environments really provide that observability and network boundary for a set of grouped or related container apps. And then I want you to think of each container app as a microservice. So, container app 1 might be the order service, container app 2 might be the inventory service, container app 3 might be the pricing service, whatever that might look like, right? So it's really more of an application concept. Within a container app, we also have the concept of revisions, which I mentioned earlier. So let's say we have, an order container app, and then we could have revision 1 of that container app and revision 2, even potentially 3 or 4, that are all going to be dictated based on, incremental changes to that container app that you can get that A/B testing or, traffic shifting to. And then within the revision concept, we have the concept of, I don't like pod here. I should have updated that. That should really be replica. So you'll think of a replica as being an instance of a revision. So if you think about the scaling, for example, I might have 5 instances of revision 1 that I want to run, and I might have 10 instances of revision 2 based on my scale rules. So that's what the pod or revision concept is. So hopefully that, pod or replica concept. So single order service with multiple, revisions, and then each of those revisions has the ability to scale to, 0 to many instances. I think I did a pretty good job touching on all of these concepts, actually, so I think we can probably continue moving forward. But there are a couple of things I do want to call out. So from a container perspective, we support Linux at the moment, Linux-based container images. So if you're looking to run Windows containers, it's not currently supported on container apps today, but would love to hear any feedback. If that's a highly requested feature, then we'll definitely evaluate that down the line. We can support containers that are coming from any public or private registry. And then, we're not allowing customers to run privileged containers or processes that require root access. So this is something else to consider. There is no required base container image that we make or enforce you to specify. And if your container app was to crash, we obviously handle the resiliency of those on the back end. And we do support the sidecar model. So if you did want to run specific containers together in a pod or a replica, you would use a container as a sidecar to your primary app. If you were potentially wanted to share scale rules across a couple of different applications, but it's typically going to be a single application container and any supporting additional capability like a logging or exporter or something like that that enhances the overall capability of the initial application. Okay, awesome. So we've talked about environments, we've talked about container apps, revisions, we've talked about managed envoy and the traffic splitting capability. So at this point, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about a bit of a real world scenario. I think we have 30 minutes left. So we'll get into it just a little bit. And once we do that, then we'll come back and talk a little bit about some recent updates and announcements, a little bit about some roadmap items, and then we'll pause again for any additional questions, hopefully with, 8 to 5 minutes left in the call. So one of the things I want to call out a little bit is our Dapper integration, because the application concepts that I'm going to be showing you today actually leverage Dapper. So as I mentioned, Dapper is an optional capability within container apps that you can leverage. And it's an open source project that we have brought into our platform. And essentially what it allows you to do, as I mentioned, it helps you to build resilient, distributed, event-driven microservice-based applications. So Dapper itself can run on premises, in the cloud, on edge. So we brought that into our managed PaaS platform. So through this basically set of APIs, you can easily write distributed applications that run as, and the Dapper sidecar will run as that sidecar process next to your core container app application. And what we support today inside of container apps is service-to-service invocation, state management, pub sub, resource bindings and triggers, actors. We support observability, but essentially the observability bit is all about distributed tracing. So what we enable you to do is pass in an application insights instrumentation key when you deploy your microservices. And this will allow you to kind of see which Dapper services are communicating with each other, what the API calls are, all through App Insights. We don't currently have support for Dapper secrets. Instead, we have our own secrets implementation through container apps. So luckily, you can use the two very well together. So if you have to define any kind of secrets for your application to use or for your Dapper components, you're able to do that via Azure Container Apps secrets. So let me show you the application architecture of what I'm going to walk you through today. So here's our overall application architecture. So as I mentioned, within container apps, we provide that managed Dapper support. And then we'll have each of our respective container apps represented by these hexagons. I think that's a hexagon, or is it an octagon? I don't know. You can correct me in the chat. I think maybe it's an octagon. It looks like it has four here. So each of those, blue octagons or hexagons, LOL, is going to be a different container app. So those are the logical microservices that are in your application. So we have an order service, which is going to be our entry point. So customers can come into our, it's called Red Dog. That's the name of the sample that we put together on my on the cloud native team that I was formerly on. So you can come in and basically order medicine. So it's a virtual pharmacy. So a user can come in, a user can place an order, and then that order will then go through the Dapper sidecar to Azure Service Bus. In this case, is the implementation we chose. And that order will be placed on a pub sub topic. Like I said, this will be Azure Service Bus in our case. And then we have 4 subscribing services. We have the make line service, the receipt service, the loyalty service, and the accounting service. All of these have their own Dapper sidecars, and those Dapper sidecars are wired up to enable communication from the pub sub topic. So the make line service, and this arrow right here should be right here to the Dapper sidecar. So I apologize there. But what you can see is when a new order comes into that topic, each of these respective services has different actions it's going to take. So the receipt service will generate a receipt for the order. The loyalty service will calculate loyalty points for the new order. The accounting service will aggregate some data about recent orders over the past 10 minutes, orders over time. And then the make line service will put that medical order, like for a couple of medications, into a virtual queue, and that virtual queue will essentially be shown on the user interface in order to show us which orders are currently being processed. So the virtual worker and virtual customers are 2 container apps that are running internal to the environment. The virtual customer is just placing a series of orders continuously to generate traffic. And then the virtual worker is essentially running on a cron job, so that every 15 seconds or so, it can look at the make line and complete a new order or fulfill an order for that was placed. So that's essentially the overall application architecture that I'm going to show you a little bit about today. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing just for a second and pull up the associated bits on my local machine. So just give me 1 second here. And feel free, if there are any questions, just let me know while I'm pulling this stuff up. Okay.
So can you hear us,
awesome.
Kendall?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. So there were some questions actually. So just a bit earlier, we were a bit too late to answer, but if you want to take them now, that's fine.
Sure.
So one question is about the web applications. You mentioned that there was something in preview there. I think bring your own certificates, or is
Yeah.
the whole web application still in preview?
So we can run web applications in container apps today, but if you needed the like really kind of what we feel enables web scenarios, which is the custom domains and bring your own certificates, those are still features that have not yet shipped. So we've committed to them, we're working on them, and we're allowing customers to we're letting customers know that it's coming. So they're not in preview today, but they will be available soon within the preview service altogether. So yeah, you could run a web application, but typically for that scenario to truly be supported from our perspective, there's a few things that we're still shipping.
All right, thanks. So yeah, that's one for now. I will save the other one for when your session is done. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Sounds good. Okay. I'm going to reshare my screen here. We're going to look at Visual Studio Code. So let me know when we're good to go here and you can see.
You can see your screen.
Perfect. Okay, I'll zoom in a little bit here just to make sure that it's visible to everyone. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to clear this off. So we've covered the application architecture, right? So here's my actual code repository with all of the respective container apps that I showed you before. And I'm not going to go too much into detail because I think it would be a little bit too verbose for what we're trying to accomplish today. But what I will just show you is sort of how Dapper is working, and then I'll show you how these services can actually be deployed to Azure Container Apps. So let's take a look at the order service, for example. I have an order controller. And what this order controller is essentially doing is using Dapper in order to create and publish orders. So you can see here, I'm using the Dapper SDK. So one of the things Dapper provides is the ability for you to use either just HTTP or gRPC endpoints, or you can actually use the Dapper SDK, which makes writing your code a lot with Dapper a lot simpler, just because the SDK abstracts some of the the insides, the innards of Dapper for you and provides a lot of capability in handling. So we use the Dapper SDK for C# in this case. And what you'll see is when a new order comes in, we actually just use the Dapper client that we've instantiated, and we use this method for publish event async. So what we're passing in here is some details about, at this point, we don't have any code for Azure Service Bus in our application, right? So like, how does my app know that we want to use Azure Service Bus if we don't have any Azure Service Bus references inside of our application code? So this is where I'm going to demystify this a little bit. So we have the pub sub name, which when I roll over it is reddog.pubsub, and I'll explain where that comes from in just a second. We have the order topic, so we have the name of the topic that we want to publish this order to, and then we actually have the order summary object, and this is essentially just going to be an order summary that we create based on the post, right? So if I post for a new order, I'm going to take that order object in, and I'm going to create an order summary that I then put onto the topic for my consumers. So that's what it looks like from this perspective. So we know that this pub sub name is meaningful when we use it here, and we know that the topic name is meaningful. So I'm going to show you an example of one of the subscribers. So MakeLine, for example, is a subscriber to the order service. And what we can see here is we have this endpoint, and this endpoint says HTTP post orders. So when a new order comes in from that Dapper mechanism, I have subscribed in my, I believe it happens here in my startup config. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, we can see here. So we can say we can see that we're adding some Dapper configuration in our code, and then we also have this endpoints map subscription handler. So this is an important point that I want to call out. So we are actually using the Dapper SDK, and we're using the subscription handler in order to wire up when an app needs to be a subscriber to a particular topic. So that's what's happening in the MakeLine controller. Basically, that order is going to come here. So we see topic is pub sub name, so reddog.pubsub. So we remember this name is meaningful, right? Because this is the pub sub name that the order service is publishing to, and we have the order topic. So through this annotation on this method, this is how this method will get triggered anytime a new order is placed onto that topic. So very easily, I have now configured my app to use Azure Service Bus without using any Azure Service Bus dependency. What's even cooler here is that I can switch out the component implementation. So I can say, hey, I don't want to use Service Bus anymore. I want to use Redis streams, and I can keep all my code the same. I can keep the component name the same even, and all I would have to do is change the component. I would have to change the details of reddog.pubsub. So let's take a look at reddog.pubsub and what that actually is. So we can see here, this is our container app deployment. So, and I might actually have the components in I have my code repo and my infra as code repo separated, which is just a preference. So I think I have my Red Dog. Did I close that out? 1 second, let me pull that back up. I think I might actually have my components here. Give me just 1 second. I want to see if we have our components in this repository. I'm going to show you them in 2 different formats. .pubsub. Yes, here we go. Okay, perfect. So this is what a component actually looks like. I just want to show you this really quickly because I think this is valuable. So we can see here that we have a YAML file, and it looks like maybe my screen's a little delayed. So I'll give it a second to catch up. Maybe it's just delayed on my end, but I'll just give it a second here to catch up. So what I did is I found our, can you all see my component screen? Can you all give me a quick confirmation? Can you see the component? Or is it still lagging? Hopefully you can see it. I'm going to wait until it catches up on my end. Okay, it's caught up on my end, so you should be able to see it. So if you
there's
see
a
here,
slight delay in the feed or in the stream, Kendall. So sorry for not catching up sooner, but we can see the component. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure. So this is, I just want to call out what a component actually looks like. So if you remember, the name was reddog.pubsub. So I specify that there's a component called reddog.pubsub, and then I have a type. So this type is going to tell Dapper the type of component implementation is going to be Azure Service Bus. If I switched this out and said pubsub.azure.redis, or if I wanted to even use another cloud provider, right? GCP has options that are available. There are a ton of different component implementations that you can switch out for. So I'm using Service Bus. I provide some metadata, which is basically the connection string. So I securely create that via a Dapper secret. And like I said, we don't support native Dapper secrets, so I'll show you what it looks like in container apps. But we just need to give Dapper the ability to connect to that particular PubSub mechanism. And then we create these scopes to show which services can actually leverage that. And I think we have some customization here that adds, a couple of other features. See, here's an example of a different one, which is called pubsub.rabbitmq. And if I wanted to switch out the component implementation to use RabbitMQ instead of Service Bus, I could just create a different component and give it a different name and switch out that name, and voila, my app is working. So I'm going to show you what this looks like in container apps. So I have bicep files. This is just the infrastructure as code approach I'm using. We support bicep, ARM, Azure CLI commands. We're working to support Terraform before GA. So these are just things to be mindful of. I just happen to be using bicep. So let's take a look at what it would look like to deploy the order service. So here's a bicep template that's been created to create a container app, based around that order service microservice within a container apps environment. So I specify the container apps environment or the kube environment ID. So this is just basically going to be, hey, deploy the environment first, retrieve the ID, and then I want to deploy this particular container app to that environment. I'm passing in some information about the container itself. So in this case, it's called order service. And I've already, imagine I have a CI/CD pipeline that has, anytime I'm making modifications to the order service, it's obviously going to go and run an automated CI/CD process that builds the new container image and pushes it to a registry. In this case, we're using GitHub Container Registry, which is a public registry. Then we're going to give it scale. So do I want this container app to scale to 0? Do I want to set minimum replicas maybe to 5 because I know baseline traffic is going to be high and I want to avoid incurring cold start? So I could change that to minimum replicas of 10 or 100 based on, whatever your baseline load testing indicates. I can also provide some information about Dapper, right? Do I want to enable Dapper? The answer in this case is yes. I'm going to give it an app ID for Dapper to use. I'm going to give it an app port, which tells Dapper what port to talk to to communicate with my application on. And then I'm going to pass in the components. So you can see here, this is where that reddog.pubsub service bus component is defined. And I'm passing in a connection string for connecting to service bus. And then, how is that actually getting populated? I'm actually creating a container app secret, which has a name of service bus root connection string. And here, because we're using Bicep and infrastructure as code, we can actually go retrieve that primary connection string after we do the deployment of service bus. So we would deploy the container app. When we think about infrastructure as code, obviously we can define dependencies and what we want to be deployed first. And then we can basically retrieve certain parameters from those deployed resources. So that's what's happening here. What's really cool is, like, let's say we wanted to take a step backward, and I can just show you this quickly because I have it, and why not? I would love to show y'all. If you wanted to go way more simple and you say, hey, I just have a basic API, I'm trying to get it up and running in container apps, you could obviously go deploy that via the Azure CLI. So we have great Azure CLI documentation, but we also have a YAML manifest that you can use. So for example, I have a C# API, super basic, and I created a C#.yaml file, and I basically have the ability to specify, and I'm giving you my registry password, so I'm gonna have to go change that. So don't DDoS me. Let me go ahead and I'll delete that for now. So I provide some information about, like in this case, I'm deploying a container app called Weather API to a specific resource group in a specific environment. I'm setting up connectivity to Docker Hub. I'm specifying ingress. Do I want to expose the API externally? In this case, I do not. I'm actually using VNet integration, so only other callers within the VNet can use it. But then I'm still doing, some of the same things, right? Passing in the container app, the image, the name of the container, any resource constraints. I'm giving it some scale rules. And in this case, I'm using an HTTP scale rule that says, hey, once I hit 100 concurrent requests, I want you to scale out to another instance of my container app. So this is just I just wanted to let you know there are other ways to interact with the platform. The way that I'm showing you is a little bit more enterprise grade. So I have a specific Bicep file for each of my respective apps. And then I have my overall deployment, which also deploys, the other supporting resources for the application architecture. So at this point, we understand kind of what the order service is doing, how Dapper is working. We know that there are subscribers that we want to communicate with the service bus instance to retrieve those orders. So now I'm just going to show you what it looks like. So I ran the script. I have it running in the Azure portal. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a second, just because I want to make sure that I pull up the correct. It's a hexagon, by the way. Thank you, Paco. I was really struggling there, wasn't I? That's how you have a bit of a noodle brain sometimes when you've been talking too much. So yes, the hexagons. Thank you for that. So I'm going to pull this up and I'm going to reshare my screen. The only reason I'm not sharing is I just want to make sure I navigate to the appropriate place and don't share any resources that might not be something I want to share. So just give me 1 second. I'm going to show you what the portal experience looks like. Now, one thing I do want to call out here is that we are a preview service. And with being a preview service, there are changes that we're making to enhance the experience based on iterative feedback that we're getting. So, for example, right now you enable Dapper within a container app spec, and you provide the components within a specific container app. One of the changes that we're currently making is providing the option or the ability for your container apps within an environment to share components. So, for example, if my order service is the publisher to my Azure Service Bus instance, and I have 3 subscribers, they all most likely will use the same Azure Service Bus instance. So in its current iteration, you'd have to copy and paste that config into four different container apps. So what we did is we moved it up a level. So now I can define one component for Azure Service Bus, and it can be shared across those container apps. So that's going to model more of the open source implementation, and that is something that we've recently implemented. So you'll see that change trickle into the product. So I do want to be conscientious of the fact, it's not GA for a reason. We're making improvements and modifications to enhance the experience, as we go. So the app is pulling up right now. I am just pulling up the user interface. What I'll do while I'm here is I will walk you through some of the resources that actually got deployed. And then after I show you a couple quick things here, I'm going to flip it over to share a couple more slides on updates because I think that those are relevant, and then I'll leave 5 minutes for questions. Okay, so I'm just going to put these into a bit more logical grouping here. Hopefully you can see the Azure portal. So I see some supporting resources I've created, like the Azure Cache for Redis. I've created a Cosmos DB. I have my container apps environment, which hosts my container apps. I have a log analytics workspace, which is where all of my log streaming is being output. I have some other resources that are supporting my application. So we can close those for now. So what you'll see is all of those respective microservices deployed as container apps, and they're all within the same container apps environment. So one of the cool things is, like I mentioned, we have that App Insights integration for Dapper. So we could get some tracing and telemetry, see what's going on. So you see I have over 7,000 requests that have come in just today. I can see server response time. I can show data over the past 30 days. If I look at my application map, which is something that I love taking a look at. Ooh, no, hopefully this will load. Let's see if we can. It would be too good if the demo gods gave me no issues. Oh, here we go. Okay, so we see here that we have a couple of instances of our application running. We should be able to see traffic actually flowing from these. There might be an issue that's okay. There we go. That's much better, right? So we can see an application map of all of those microservices that are running in that same shared environment. We can see the number of instances. So right now I'm not scaling, which is fine. If I click in here, I should see the order service is actually calling local. This is to its local Dapper sidecar. I can drill in and see some information around the API calls, the performance, the number of calls. I can zoom in on certain ranges. So we get some cool information here just in terms of creating some App Insights integration. Hopefully my application is not going to give me too much grief and it's going to load. Oh, perfect. My application is loading. Let's keep our fingers crossed and see if it populates with some data. It's a little slow on my end because my computer is running a little slow. So we'll see. Oh, perfect. Okay, it's coming. It's coming. So as this is loading, what we can see is we have our order queue, which is orders that are being prepared. We can see orders over time. That's coming from the accounting service. Sales and profit also coming from there as well. And I apologize, it would be a little bit more dynamic if my computer wasn't running quite as slow. But this is at least our front end user interface that's providing some insight into all of those container apps that are running into the environment. And what's nice here is that I'm not exposing any of those other API endpoints running in the container apps environment externally, right? I can basically create a single point of ingress, and I can say, hey, only one point of ingress is enabled, and all of the other container apps are isolated within the environment itself. So we can see that the orders are coming in and that those virtual customers are placing those new orders, and the virtual workers are obviously consuming and creating, and outputting those. And we're seeing that dynamic aspect here. So that shows you a little bit what's going on. We are working to enhance a lot of our portal experience right now. So I'm not going to walk you through exactly what it looks like in the portal, just because I think we're going to be making a lot of modifications in the near future. So I'd like to pivot back, cover a couple more important things from a slide perspective, and then we can take any questions that you might have. So we're going to play it here. Let's switch this over. Okay, so one of the most recent features that we released is the Bring Your Own Virtual Network feature. So for customers who need network isolation and want to have the IP addresses for container apps and for their environment coming off of their Azure Virtual Network, we now support that. One of the nice things that we provide is a single static IP address for your environment. So that's really nice, because if you need to integrate, obviously, with like a firewall, or if you want to lock down that IP address or that externally exposed endpoint, you can do that now. I put together a blog post with the help of my teammates, so I'll make sure that you can access that. Hopefully you can access that. I'm not sure how I can drop links here, but at the minimum, you can just search through the Microsoft Tech Community. That's where this is posted. If you type in Azure Container Apps Virtual Network Integration, it should pop up for you in Google or Bing. So this will give you a good idea of what we've implemented, and we're still working on documentation around ways that you can lock down your container apps environment if you're using like Azure Firewall. What are the ports, what are the FQDNs that I need to enable in order to make sure that the service is still functional? So those are things we're working on. I have a quick demo here that just shows sort of how this works in theory, or not in theory, but practically. So basically going through creating an Azure virtual network, creating a couple of subnets. So essentially you'll have a subnet that you can specify. That's where the control plane components for container apps will get their IP addresses, along with any of the apps that are running in the environment. Then I can create the environment with this internal only flag, which is what's going to lock it down to that single static IP address. And then we get a default domain for our environment. So until you can do bring your own domain, we provide a default domain. And then what I recommend is basically you can set up an Azure private DNS zone, which is going to take that static IP address and the default domain. And essentially, any traffic that's destined for that default domain, you can then send to the static IP address in order to do resolution. What I'm doing here is I created an Azure VM inside of a subnet in the same virtual network. And then I created a container app that has an external endpoint. Now, external in this case means that the application essentially is exposed to other callers on the VNet. And unfortunately, my talk track didn't line up perfectly with the demo, so I apologize. But the point is, when you externally provide an endpoint in a VNet integrated scenario, that means other callers within the VNet can access it. So you saw when I made that API call, I was able to hit the endpoint. If I was to update that and change it to internal, and then I try to curl the endpoint, my VM can no longer communicate with that container app because I've made sure that it's accessible only within the environment. So the two levels of accessibility would be intra-environment accessibility, and then that second one would be, if we look here, the VM can call the endpoint because I exposed it externally to other callers in the same VNet. There is no public IP though, right? Like there's no public endpoint. So if you do VNet integration, you can't make it accessible from the internet. Whereas, in those non-VNet scenarios, if I expose it externally, that's to the public. And if I do it internally, it's to the environment. Okay, cool. Another thing that I wanted to call out, we are making a pretty big change. This is an announcement that we have on our public backlog, but we're doing a namespace migration. So this will impact the CLI and any bicep or ARM templates that customers might be using today. So I just wanted to put that out there in case you already have some great demos. You can go ahead and migrate to change that over from Microsoft.web to Microsoft.app. And then you'll need to re-register with a CLI, the CLI that uses this new namespace. So this is more of a back-end change, but it is going to be a breaking change for customers, which we want to do all those breaking changes while we're in preview. If you're interested in some of our roadmap, we have a public backlog on GitHub. And if you go through our issues and just say label equals roadmap, that's where any item is tagged that we've already committed to doing. So whether it's VNet integration, custom domains, managed identity, better logging experience, Dapper support for gRPC, Visual Studio Code extensions. We're going to think about lifting, or we will be lifting quotas. Like for example, right now you can only run 2 environments per subscription, but all of these are just preview capabilities that we'll lift at GA. We also have things like configuration of custom readiness and liveness probes. So those are just things to be on your radar. And then the last thing I wanted to cover before opening it up for questions, if anybody has time to stick around, we have a Discord channel that's public, so feel free to join there. We have great channels for Dapper, we have great channels for Kata, for general questions, documentation, suggestions. We have a mailing list, so if you wanted to join and just be notified of any major changes or new features that are available. And then last but not least, as I mentioned, we have our public backlog where you can make feature requests and also take a look at existing issues to see if there's any resolvable problems that you run into that we've already fixed. So that's all I have. I would love to take any questions with the 0 minutes we have left, but if y'all have if you're able to stick around, please do.
Well, sorry about that. I still needed to unmute myself and try to be very delicate about it. Caught on camera. Thank you very much, Kendall, for giving this awesome insights in container apps. I still have to admit that I'm still trying to wrap around it and find use cases within my virtual desktop environments, because it feels like it's very focused on web and API driven applications. And I have to admit that I'm still struggling with some legacy client server facing applications. So will there be opportunities in the future to also migrate those kind of legacy applications to container apps? Or is that a bridge too far?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. I think it speaks to the line that we're trying to draw, which is, we don't want to boil the ocean and try to do everything. And we have to think about what the value is from a platform as a service capability. So we get a lot of those questions even for customers who say, hey, I'm running on Kubernetes, like how can I migrate to Azure Container Apps? And a lot of it comes down to like, what features and capabilities do you need on the underlying platform to be successful? So, I mean, hypothetically, other than Windows containers, like we really should be able to support any kind of container image that's supported on Kubernetes. So like if you had a monolithic application, if you can containerize it and run it successfully, we should be able to support it on container apps. There shouldn't be a big differentiator there. I think where it comes down to is like, what kind of access do you need to the underlying node? Do you need GPU support? Do you need Windows containers? So I think, do you need to bring your own service mesh, right? Like it's a much more complex situation when it comes down to that. So I think if you have the app portability aspect of a container, as long as you can get your app into that, then you're at least that's step one. And then I think the next question would be, what kind of capabilities does this need to function? If it can do it on AKS or Kubernetes, you're probably 50% of the way there. Then it just becomes, what features do we choose to expose, and how do we make sure that we don't boil the ocean and try to implement every single thing that Kubernetes does, because likely that will then lose some of our target audience, which is simplifying this experience. It's a great question. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Yeah, and I also have some questions from YouTube, and I guess this first one ties in a little bit to the question from Esther. So we had a question from Andrew McCallum, and he's asking, are there any recommended use cases for Azure Container Apps, like best practices, or how or where to use it? Like, who is it aimed for? Who's going to use this technology?
Yeah, so I mean, I will say, I do think it goes to, let's see, let me find the slide. I think it goes to this slide, right? So like when we look at microservices, especially in Azure, Azure Container Instances doesn't support service to service, or service discovery. It doesn't support auto scale. So I think it's really for customers who want to run microservice-based applications or container-based applications, but might not have the ability to run and manage Kubernetes themselves, right? We have small teams who might be using Docker Compose, and they're looking for a place to land. I think that's a really good use case. I think if you're doing event-driven processing via Azure Functions and want a platform as a service that sort of manages the scalability and provides a less opinionated framework, I think that can be a good fit here. But yeah, I think it's really anyone looking for a managed experience that allows them to run multiple containers that have some interoperability and intercommunication. So hopefully that helps. I think that there's still some work to be done, I think, to frame out, when would a customer use what? But I think that this is a really good entry point, especially if customers are unfamiliar with Kubernetes, but want the portability and like the DevOps benefits of containers, and don't necessarily have the skill set to go create their own managed ingress and create their own, use a service mesh to do traffic splitting and figure out how to do their own authentication mechanisms or deploy their own Helm charts, right? Like we simplify a lot of that experience through this platform.
Yeah, I guess you're targeting a big group here, so that's fine. So another question, it's from Jason Haley, and well, also Robbie Pott asked pretty much the same thing. He says, I know Helm is Kubernetes, but any thoughts on how we could get something like a WordPress Helm chart running in container apps? Or are Helm charts coming to container apps anyway?
Yeah, so I don't see Helm charts. There's no plan for that, right? Our goal is to simplify some of that deployment mechanism where customers don't have to learn Kubernetes YAML to be able to use the platform. I think from a WordPress perspective, right, like there are definitely ways you could do it. We don't have any great tooling that you can just point to a Helm chart and basically do a conversion. We do have some community contributions that have been focused around potentially using like taking a Docker Compose and scaffolding a container apps manifest. So I think some of our our tooling investments in the future will help to enhance the migration and portability aspects of those things. But right now it would be, hey, I want to run WordPress. I have my WordPress, container image. What are the ports I need to expose? What are the few things that I need to add here? And you should be able to get up and running without the complexity of what Helm does. But I hear the ask, which is, can we provide an easy migration path from concepts we might already be familiar with in Kubernetes? And I think that there's a lot of evaluation and work to be done to evaluate how to best do that.
Okay, thanks. Well, I think that's a great answer. So Jason will be happy with that.
Well, that basically concludes the questions that we had prepared. And you also already triggered me to come up with some cool legacy-focused use cases. So thanks for that. Thank you very much for taking the time, because we know you have a very busy schedule. So we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing these cool new features with us. So enjoy the rest of the day, Kendall, and looks like the cat is waking up. So
yeah, just a little
perfect
bit,
timing to switch back to caring for the cat. Thank you very much, and talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Talk to you all soon. Look forward to working with you in the future on this.
Perfect.
Bye.
Bye.
And hopefully you will all join us next month again for another great studio hosted session of Azure Thursday. See you soon.
See you soon.
Certain forces active upon the Earth aim to artificially suppress the natural evolution of human consciousness. It may come as unnerving news to some to hear that humanity is constantly being bombarded by forces and events that are beyond our control. It is these forces that aim to target the very spaces in which humanity has a modicum of free choice and free will. Think about where you're sitting right now. The perpetual battlefield is what we know as our everyday lives, our education, our work, our leisure, and our conscious thinking. Yet the armaments of this struggle are not guns, tanks, airplanes, bombs, or battle cruisers. It is much more subtle than this.